As I gazed upon the rain-soaked gravestone, I couldn't help but wonder if my father could feel the passage of time, 6 feet below. Every Sunday for the past 7 years, I'd made this pilgrimage to his resting place. It had become my solemn ritual, a way to pay homage to the man who had raised me, a man whose lessons I carried with me like a heavy burden. My father's death had left a void in my life that I could never fill. He had always been my anchor, my guiding light. He taught me to be resilient, to face life's challenges head-on. So, I came here every week to talk to him, to share my hopes and fears, and to seek his guidance in the silent solitude of the graveyard. Over time, the graveyard had become a second home to me. Its moss-covered stones and gnarled trees my companions in the darkest hours of my life. The regularity of my visits seemed to soothe the pain, though it never truly left me. One Sunday evening, as I stood there with the crimson rays of the setting sun casting long shadows, something felt different. The air was unusually still, and the atmosphere grew heavy with an eerie silence. My heart raced as a shiver coursed down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned, scanning the graveyard, but saw nothing amiss. I reassured myself that it was just my imagination, that grief had a way of playing tricks on the mind. But as I turned back to my father's grave, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. It sent chills through my body, and my heart pounded in my chest. Tentative steps led me closer to the source of the sound. And there, hidden behind a decrepit mausoleum, I found it, a hulking figure, its form shrouded in darkness. It had eyes that glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light, and its snarl revealed sharp, elongated teeth. My father's grave was only a few steps away, and my instincts told me to protect it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver cross, the one my father had given me on his deathbed. Holding it aloft, I yelled words of defiance. The creature recoiled, hissing and writhing in pain, its grotesque shape dissolving into a dark mist. The night fell silent once more, the malevolence vanquished. I realized then that my father's lessons had prepared me, not just for the challenges of life but for the inexplicable horrors that lurked in the shadows. As I stood there, winded but unbroken, I knew that my visits to the graveyard would continue, not out of grief, but out of a solemn duty to protect my father's resting place from the sinister forces that sought to defile it. And so, my weekly visits took on a new purpose. A vigil against the unknown, in the memory of my father, a man whose strength and wisdom had become my shield against the darkness that had entered my life, and the twisted turn it had taken. One fateful Sunday evening, among the graves, the graveyard, over time, had become my sanctuary. Every Sunday, I stood at my father's worn gravestone, baring my soul to the cold, unyielding stone, as if he could still hear me. It was a tradition that tied me to my past, to a man who had left a gaping void in my life. Those visits were more than just a ritual. They were my lifeline. Amid the quiet solitude of the cemetery, I could escape the noise of the world, finding solace in my father's memory. It was where I felt closest to him, as though his wisdom whispered in the rustling leaves and the breeze that swept through the ancient trees. But one ominous Sunday, an eerie hush settled over the graveyard. The air grew dense with an unsettling silence, and shadows stretched ominously. A chill raced down my spine, and I instinctively knew that something unnatural was unfolding. My heart hammered in my chest as I scanned the cemetery for signs of danger. Then, it happened. That same guttural growl, so terrifying and familiar, pierced the stillness. It was the malevolent presence that had terrorized my father, and it was now after me. The creature emerged from the shadows, its form shrouded in darkness, its malevolent eyes gleaming with a sickly light. Its snarl sent a shiver of dread down my spine, and my fingers fumbled for my father's silver cross, hoping against hope that it retained its protective power. With trembling hands, I raised the cross high and shouted the same words of defiance that had saved my father's grave. The creature recoiled, writhing in agony, the same sinister mist enveloping it, just as it had years ago. But this time, the malevolence felt even more tangible, its desire to harm me even stronger. When the night fell silent again, my heart still raced with fear. It was clear that I was now embroiled in the same battle against darkness that had tormented my father's resting place. My weekly visits were no longer just about honoring his memory. They were a harrowing struggle to protect him from the sinister forces that sought to desecrate his final resting place. As I stood there, shaken but resolute, I realized that my father's legacy wasn't just about his love and guidance. It was a legacy of confronting the unknown and battling against the malevolent forces that lurked in the shadows. My visits to the graveyard, once a simple tradition, had evolved into a chilling testament to the unbreakable bond between generations and the enduring fight against the horrors that lurked in the dark. Years had passed since the chilling encounters in the graveyard, and my visits had become more about defiance than memory. The unsettling occurrences had continued, the same eerie silence and the sinister growls becoming part of my weekly routine. It was as though the darkness of that place had become an inescapable companion. Still, I pressed on, my father's memory and the legacy of confronting the unknown pushing me forward. Each Sunday, I faced the malevolent force with the same words and the same silver cross, and every time, it retreated, dissolving into that sinister mist. But one Sunday, as I approached my father's grave, I felt a shift in the air, a heaviness that lingered, casting a shadow over the whole cemetery. I could sense the presence again, but this time, it was different. The malevolent force was not the only thing in the shadows. With a flicker of dread, I heard the growl, low and menacing, and the creature emerged from the darkness as always. But this time, it was not alone. A chorus of eerie whispers accompanied it, like a sinister choir, their voices carrying a terrible weight. I raised the silver cross, but the creature didn't recoil. Instead, it advanced, and the other whispering voices grew louder. The realization that this was not just a battle, but something more sinister, washed over me. In desperation, I shouted the same defiant words that had always saved me. But it wasn't enough. The creature and its whispering companions continued their advance, closing in on me, overwhelming my senses. In that moment, I felt helpless, unable to comprehend what was happening. I wished for my father's guidance, his wisdom to see me through this nightmare, but he was not there to save me. As they drew closer, the sinister whispers grew louder, filling my head with an overwhelming dread. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth: these weren't the same malevolent forces I had been battling all those years. They were something far worse, something that I couldn't fight with a silver cross and defiant words. And as they closed in, their intentions remained shrouded in mystery, their terrible agenda unfolding in the shadowy depths of the graveyard. My father's legacy, which had been a source of strength for so long, had become a curse, and I was left to face the darkest twist of all, alone and defenseless.